Hello and welcome back to the National Association for Primary Education podcast. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, you are very welcome indeed. So today I'm talking to Penny Rabiger, and she wrote an article in this issue of Primary First, which is issue 29. And I just thought this is going to be really good as we start to focus more and more on articles which are in our journal, to have a bit of a behind the scenes idea of the people that wrote them and a bit more of an in-depth conversation about what they were about. So Penny, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks very much for having me.
So why don't we start with that kind of contextual background in terms of the sorts of work you do in the organizations you're involved in first, and then we'll move on into the article itself.
Okay, great. So I was a teacher for over 10 years. I taught in primary and secondary schools in Jerusalem, in Israel. And since coming back to the UK in 2007, I've been working with organisations in the education space, so the Key for School Leaders, Challenge Partners, and I'm currently working for an organisation called Lyfta. And I'm also one of the co-founders and trustees of an organisation called the BAME Ed Network. And I also am a coach for the Anti-Racist Schools Award that's run by Leeds Beckett University. I'm a chair of governors, and I am also on a trust board of a primary multi-academy trust. So wow. Never bored.
No, I'm going to say not a lot of free time around there. It's okay. So the article was entitled, "Does Teaching Racial Justice and Equity Have a Place in Our Primary Schools?" What did that mean for you? Why that title, and why was that important?
Well, I guess because of my involvement in organisations that are about social justice and about equity, I think I'm interested in the line between social justice and equity being a sort of arena for adults, and for adults to especially in the education sector, for teachers and for leaders to think about their progression through the profession and what barriers they might face potentially because of their protected characteristics. But also, I think that there is a place for children to know about racial justice and equity. And I think it's a place where teachers and schools generally may feel some anxiety about how you do that well, and whether they should be doing it, and what examples there are of it being done well. So I guess my reason for wanting to write that article was to kind of set out some of the difficulties maybe, or some of the anxieties, but also to show some examples of where this is happening as part of the curriculum. I think teachers can't really lead on it unless they have a good grounding themselves. And I think the nature of teacher training means that teachers, especially younger teachers, don't really have a good grounding, so they will tend to avoid dealing with it. And I think certainly, recently with the sort of questions that students and their families were asking around Black Lives Matter, around that agenda, sort of took some schools by surprise, and they realized that they would have to think about this a little bit more deeply and try to understand what their position is. Some of the messages from government around what is acceptable and where the boundary lies between teaching about injustice and being impartial. So there was quite a lot of pushback, I think, and there still is pushback around what a teacher's place is in equipping children to understand society, and whether even, it's been mooted that even the concept of racial injustice could be political. So that's a fine line for teachers to tread, and it crept into the guidance for relationships, sex and health education, around impartiality and around which agencies schools could engage with to deliver parts of that curriculum. So it became I think it became wrought with quite a lot of confusion and anxiety for schools, because basically they just wanted to tackle this issue that had happened. And so yeah, I think there's quite a lot of unpicking to do.
Yeah.
So for some schools, it's a kind of like, we don't go there. And for others, there are many schools across the country and across the globe that teach rights respecting schools, staff that teach philosophy for children, that lean in more to a kind of critical thinking agenda or curriculum, that want children to be questioning. And there are others that maybe that's not part of their plan for children. And so for me, thinking about bias, for example, that's part of socialization. I know about that. I know that I am taught by society to value some things over and above other things. And I know that part of that comes with bias and stereotyping, so that I am taught by society that some people, some races, some classes are perceived to have more value in certain situations, So I feel like, yeah, maybe the more recent education hasn't included that knowledge as part of it. So it is a bit of a surprise for people. Maybe they feel a bit mortified that they might be biased and that they might be complicit in some of the injustices.
And I guess that really the whole idea of sort of institutional and sort of structural racism in terms of the idea of what it is for it to be inherent, that it just becomes, I don't know, perceived to be the norm, as opposed to it being something which you can understand and see for what it is and actually understand the difference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, I know that as a woman, I will possibly see and feel things that perhaps you as a man would not be hyper tuned to unless you had tuned yourself to it. But I also know that as a woman, I'm not born with an inherent toolkit to feminism. With race, as a person racialized as white, I haven't had to really worry too much about these things. So I'm going to have to push myself to be more awake, alert, and inclusive. And I'm also going to have to push myself not to go down the route of personalizing it and going, oh, but it's not me and it's other people. So I think it is really important to understand the structural, the systemic, and move it away from, racist, not racist, that kind of unhelpful dichotomy, really. I think one of the things we forget to do as a sector is to be learners, and to be in the situation where you're unsure and you are worried that you might get it wrong or that you don't have enough knowledge yet. That's what learning is. And I think as practitioners, we're so frightened of being in that situation. And I think especially with race, we're really terrified of getting it wrong. So we'd rather not even go there. And that's really, really unhelpful. I think one of the things that we're trying to do with the BayMed network is to help people to educate themselves. Our website is just a massive repository of every single way that you could learn about every single element in the way that suits you and works for you, because that's where you need to start. You need to start with learning. You need to start with kind of auditing where you're at and where you'd like to get to, and then map out the path and just do it. Otherwise, nothing will change. Yeah, you know what? We tend to categorize social media as this kind of terrible thing, and we've got to get children off TikTok and off Instagram. And I can say unequivocally, I think those are the places where children are learning so much about social justice, and they are connecting with people who feel the same as them or people who don't, and they take it upon themselves to re-educate their peers on some of the issues. So I think, parents, carers, grandparents, wider family, sort of adults in general, probably play an important part. Of course, schools do, but I think also, you know, the messages that young people are consuming and producing, we shouldn't overlook those because they're really powerful.
So if there was one place you'd like people to go and find out more about what it is that you've been doing, and some places where they can get some great resources to carry on these kind of thoughts, where would you send people?
Well, I'm going to be greedy and send them to two places. So one, I mentioned the BAME Ed network and our website. So that's just www.bamednetwork.com. And there you will find not only resources, but also we have a directory of diversity, equity and inclusion specialists who can support schools that want to get, you know, some more racial justice work running through the school. We have on there a list of speakers, so organizations that are organizing events often will end up with a kind of all white lineup because they don't know excellent people of color who are education specialists. So we've kind of taken it upon ourselves to say, don't worry, we will sort that. So there's hundreds of speakers on there. And we run a series of events as well. The second place that I would send people to is, I work for an organisation called Lyfta, and we are lucky enough to be supported by British Council to be able to deliver CPD to teachers to help them to weave sustainable development goals, skills and values, diversity, social justice, all of those things into their curriculum in a really beautiful way. So it's through what we call immersive story worlds. Imagine going on a 360-degree tour of different places around the globe, and within those places you can meet people, and the way you meet them is through 3 to 6 minute short documentary films where you meet a human being, a real human being, and discover just a little slice of their life. So that's free training, and then you get free access to the platform for a period of time. And to go to that, you'd go to Lyfta.com, so that's LYF for Freddie, TA.com, and you'll find out about what we do there.
Fantastic. Well, Penny, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise and your knowledge and wisdom with us. And it's great to hear the voice and hear beyond just the word on the page. And that's really something that we're going to try and expand and do more of as we speak to more people who've been part of Primary First. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.